All right, I think we're rocking and rolling now. All right, so welcome everybody. I am so excited for this evening's author talk with Ben Utecht. So we have spent the month reading his book, Counting the Days While My Mind Slips Away. And we have had some wonderful conversation in our Facebook group. And so I'm really excited to present to you this evening Ben Utecht, author, Super Bowl champ, singer, uh, father of four daughters. So
Yeah,
thanks for being here, Ben.
Amy, thank you so much for having me. And it's been amazing to watch how your passion has blossomed from the very first time we met in Minnesota to what you have going on now. So thank you for your heart and passion for this issue.
Yeah. And back at you, you've really embraced your passion with the brain injury world as well. And I really appreciate that you're so down to earth and take the time. You've been on my podcast a couple times, and it's just people really enjoy hearing from you. So
Oh, I
I'm really,
appreciate it.
really
Thank
thrilled.
you. Thank you.
So, Ben, why don't we just kind of start with what led you? I mean, we kind of know what led you to writing
Sure.
this. You were losing your memory, and so you wanted to get it written down before you lost all of it. But what was that journey like to start writing this book?
Well, it was a bit surreal because, taking it to the level of using vocabulary and writing it down to tell your story was not really where I expected my my philanthropic passion to turn into. But where one door closes, another opens, and my career ending due to concussion and experiencing some of these cognitive challenges led me down this path of beginning to be a voice and an advocate for brain health. Now, it was along that journey that I received a call from a literary agent in New York, Steve Ross. And Steve had been contacted by a New York Times best-selling author that really wanted to tell my story. And that was the first time I'd ever really thought about writing a book, or that anybody would really want to read my story. And that was the journey that set us out on a very challenging and exciting and painful and times filled with joy. I mean, the writing process was pretty amazing and even therapeutic at times, if I'm being completely honest, because it's the first time you really think deeply through every aspect of your life and how it's been affected in many ways by concussions. And I know we'll get into this, but while writing the book, I was also doing my brain training. And so we didn't even realize that kind of the miraculous ending of my story would be, the rehabilitation that I experienced through cognitive training, and what that has done for my life moving forward. So that was kind of a sweet surprise even for us in writing the book. But it was definitely a lot of work, but very, very fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can totally relate to that therapeutic aspect of writing.
Hmm.
And, maybe you can relate to this part too, but just when you hear from other people how much your book has helped them. When I first set out to write, I was writing on my own personal blog, and then it transitioned into writing on the Huffington Post, and people started emailing me thanking me. And I had hoped maybe one or two people might read my stuff, and then it turned out to be
Right.
thousands, right?
Yeah.
So, can you relate to that too? Just how, when you hear how your work is helping other people?
Yeah, I think, look, there's nothing, for me, in my opinion, there's nothing more fulfilling in life than when your passions align with the rehabilitation of the human soul. I think that um, when you experience uh, the effect that the things that you have gone through, that at one point in time you couldn't have imagined that the things that are causing you so much pain are actually going to cause freedom for other individuals. And now they're telling you that. That is a very powerful anecdote, even for, for yourself. There's a lot of healing that came out of the process for me because of what you've described. I think that was a wonderful addition to this process for me, was just allowing my vulnerability to connect with people that are going through the same things. And that's really what this whole thing that you're doing, that what I'm doing, this is what it's about, is creating a platform for people to express themselves, to find healing in many different ways, whether you're the injured or the caretaker. There's so much pain and suffering in the world of neurology, in the world of brain disorder, brain disease, cognitive disability. And so, we need people to be able to share their stories, because storytelling is what I think connects all of us as human beings.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it was kind of funny. I didn't plan it this way at all, but last month's book was Cindy Fiesel's book, After the Cheering Stops,
Mm,
talking about her late husband, Grant Fiesel, and
yeah.
how, he developed CTE. And then, I was like, oh gosh, I have 2 NFL books back to back. But you know what? They're so different, and they tell such different
Yeah.
stories. Um, one of the things I remember remarking on as I read your book the first time was just the physical injuries you sustained starting in high school. Oh, and
Yeah.
fun fact for everyone watching, Ben and I actually went to the same high school. Just, I don't know, probably 8 years apart or so. But he's a local legend around here. But just the physical, on top of, taking out the concussion and head injury component, but just the physical injuries that you had to deal with throughout your career. How are those affecting you now as an adult?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that, because as I went on this journey, and people reading the book, and people interested even in looking at film potential for telling this story, and as much as the book talks about my concussion history, I think most people's reaction was what you just described. They couldn't believe how many times I had been injured in the ways that I had been injured and continued to play. And so I think my wife and I, and during the writing of this book, looked at my football career starting in 9th grade in high school, all the way through the NFL, and really discovered that there was only one injury-free season.
Wow.
From my 9th grade year in high school. And I don't know why that is. Unfortunately, I had a body that just maybe wasn't made for the longevity of playing an extensive career in the NFL. But my passion, just when you love something, you just do whatever you can to keep going, until obviously the concussions and the impact on the brain, I think, changed all of that for the first time. I was able to deal with the ankle, sprains, and the bone breaks, and the rib fractures, and the shoulders, and everything else that comes with playing a rough sport. But once you start to injure the identity, that's when I think it was time for us to walk away. But I'll be honest with you, I'm 38, and I'm starting to feel playing. I don't feel 38. I feel 58. But it's
I hear you.
I knew that was a part of the game, and so I'm doing my best to just take care of myself today, and so far so good.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and I think you just brought up a point, going into football as an athlete, that you're going to probably have injuries. You're probably going to have an ankle or a knee or, whatever. But the whole head injury thing, right? The whole concussion and brain injury. I think we're just now starting to really shed light on that. And, had you known before going into football, I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? But had you known how it would impact your memory, do you think you would have played football?
Well, that's kind of the controversial question, I think, that you
Right.
can ask any former player, and you're going to get a lot of different answers. I've heard former players say that even if they were diagnosed with brain disease today, that they would still go back and play. And then you experience other players that that at the first hint of any type of long-term injury, they would walk away.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very subjective
Yeah.
question, and that's okay. It should be, because you're dealing with individuals. So for me, I when I think about that and think about where I am today, which is very good, probably stronger cognitively than I've ever been, which is really miraculous, and I know we'll talk about that. But looking back, would I play football again? I would. The amount of life lessons that I learned from the coaches that I had a chance to play for was incredible. Now, I think with the information that we have today, I definitely would have played the game differently. I'm very tall, 6'7", and I played very tall, which is not a good thing. I played standing up. I ran across the field standing up, and I took a lot of hits. And if I were to go back and do things differently, I would be a little bit smarter in how I would play the game and the way that I would move on the field. I'd be a little bit more protected by the new rules that are in place. So I think, I think that while I might be more cautious and might make decisions sooner than I did while I played, I do think that I would play again.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it doesn't surprise me because, I mean, had you not played, you went and met your wife and have your 4 daughters either, right? So I know, like I said, hindsight's 2020.
It's tough.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask me the same question 20 years from now and I'm diagnosed with early onset anything,
Right.
the answer probably, and we can say without a shadow of a doubt that, football was the cause, then that probably changes my answer. But again, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You wake up and each day is a new day, and you do your best with that day. And so that's kind of how I'm answering the question
Right.
today.
So reading your book, how you talk about some of the stuff you just don't remember and you had to fill in the blanks with your dad and your wife. And in particular, your best friend's wedding that you sang at, right? And you had like no memory of that.
Mhm.
Um, what was that like when you were in that moment of not remembering?
Yeah, it was scary. I mean, it was scary on a number of levels. One, having just started a new family, it was scary to think about what would be the long-term effects of this. What type of a dad am I going to be? What type of a husband am I going to be later on? So there was just the reality of um, of those of the current situation that I was in. And then on top of that, this was all happening, and as you read in the book, my concussion was a pivotal turning point in the NFL concussion protocol situation. And so at this time, this is when, Bennett Omalu was discovering CTE. This is when all of this information was flooding the marketplace about the severity of concussion. And so now you have all of this, mainstream media information adding to your fear, because now my immediate response is, well, this must be brain disease. because I'm dealing with these issues, I must have brain disease. And that means that my life is over. And so that caused a lot of fear. And really that was, a part of writing the book was wanting to capture that. And the title of the book, Counting the Days While My Mind Slips Away, is not a statement of truth for my life. It's a statement of the reality that fear is real. And when I wrote the song, You Will Always Be My Girls, to my wife and daughters, about concussion and the effects of concussion, that was the first line of the song. I'm in here counting the days while my mind is slipping away. And so, and all of that is just related to the fear that exists. And so that was, I think, what I was really going through at the time. When we sat out in front of my friend's house and asked ourselves the question, wow, did that really just happen? Did can you not really remember being at Matt's wedding? And that was a tough situation to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time, what does that mean? And I don't, I can, it's so funny because I almost use that question maybe as a test, because I get asked, as you can imagine, I get asked that question a lot. What was it like, to lose the memory of this wedding? And so I almost use that question now as a test, because every time I get asked, even when you just asked me now, I in my mind, I just tried to go back and see if I could remember if anything new would come. And it never really has. I feel like maybe there are moments that, gosh, do I remember what that room looked like, or what, and it never really becomes clear. And so, and I'm okay with that. I think that, there definitely there are definitely consequences to multiple concussions, and I'm facing some of those. Thankfully, with my cognitive training, all of those weaknesses have become strengths again. And so I really believe going forward, I'll do a great job of remembering, because my memory is strong again. But the injuries that I did sustain definitely took a toll on some of those, long-term memories.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was did any of that memory come back? And, I know how scary it is. I remember early in my recovery, I would be driving and all of a sudden I'd be like, where am I? How did I get here? And it was a familiar place, somewhere I'd driven 100 times before. And I had met, when my accident first happened, I had just moved into my apartment building. So I didn't know many of my neighbors. And like 8-9 months later, I asked my one neighbor, like, I don't remember, how did we first meet? And he told me. And then like a month later, I'm like, I don't remember, how did we meet the first time? And he kind of looked at me like, are you being serious? And I'm like, yeah. And he knew about my brain injury. And so he told me again. And I bet you it took me 3 or 4 times before it kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, I think, one thing that the concussion doesn't care if you play a sport or not. Mm-hmm. The concussion just wants to capture your brain, and so I think, and I know you've experienced this, whether it's interviewing me, a former NFL player, or to the mailbox and had a serious. Concussions, they affect everybody.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of crossover that we face.
Yeah. I think.
Did you hear that? No,
yeah.
I'm still here.
Yeah, you just briefly locked up on me, and I don't know if it's my end or your end, but
no,
you're so right.
Yeah.
That's what I say. Concussions don't discriminate. They don't care how old you
Right.
are, what color you are, how much money you have. They don't care.
Hmm. Exactly. Exactly.
So the question that came up over and over in the group,
Hmm.
everybody's remarked on the fact that you were able to improve your memory. And
Yeah.
for many of us, memory is a really big symptom.
Exactly.
And so I know we've talked about it before, but what did you do to help get your memory back?
Well, in the process of sharing my story and working with the American Academy of Neurology and now the American Brain Foundation, I I came across an organization in Minnesota called Learning RX, and it's a franchise company out of Colorado that has built a business around helping individuals of all ages their cognitive weaknesses. And just being very skeptical coming out of the NFL and meeting countless of people and individuals that are trying to sell you something. This supplement will take everything away, and this and that. Um, I I met Rich Frieder at Savage, Minnesota, and I saw what he was doing was a different way, but also similar to what I experienced in the weight room playing football. That there were a number of pre-designed exercises. There were routines and programs that that you follow, that you work through, and that you improve on. And so I took that to my friends at the American Academy of Neurology, and I talked with some of the greatest neurological minds in the world. And I said, what do you think of this? And I was surprised to hear them say that, look, uh, cognitive training and strength, turning cognitive weaknesses into cognitive strengths is rudimentary neurology. And I said, really, rudimentary? And they said, yeah, it's really common understanding that you can take cognitive weaknesses like memory and you can improve them if you're willing to put in the time and do the work. And I thought, well, man. So I signed up with Learning RX, and before I started the program, ended up going to the 78th and 98th percent by the end of the program. And I can tell you now that I'm cognitively stronger than I ever have been, than I've ever been. And my wife would tell you she got her husband back because I I I trained as hard as I've ever trained on the football field in that brain training room. And my coach will tell you that. And the improvements that I made in my working memory, my short-term memory, my long-term memory, my auditory processing speeds were significant, and that changed everything for me. And that's something that I pray that in the next 10 years we see more cognitive, like elite cognitive programs becoming available to the public, so that others can experience the same improvement.
So I had someone post a question asking if you still have moments of not remembering. So, you talked about your friend's wedding and how you still,
Yeah.
you can't pull those out. They're gone.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
do you still have memory problems now?
Yeah. That's the thing about the brain, right? Is it's uh, any true neurologist will tell you that they don't even know anything about the brain. The brain really is a mystery, even to the smartest brain experts in the world. And what I mean by that is um, there are times still when I'm faced with new opportunities to remember things from the past. And because I've never been confronted with that specific um, demand on memory, there have been other moments where I'm the only person at the table that doesn't remember, and I'm just careful. I try to be so careful to not immediately just attach it to the concussions that I had in the NFL. My wife and I usually have a system now where if I experience something like that, I pull her aside and we have a conversation about it, and I let her know what I do remember, what I don't. And there are times when she's been right along my side and not remembering. Yeah, gosh, I don't even remember that. You know, And then there have been some times where she said, "Gosh, yeah, I think that's probably something that I would expect you to remember." And she's been a good gauge for me to know whether or not it's something that probably has come out of an injury that I've faced in the past. But um, again, because of that work that I've put in, I know that and my neurologists have told me that there are going to be memories that you're not going to get back because of those injuries. But it doesn't mean you can't create it doesn't mean that you can't strengthen your brain so that it moving forward is going to be able to store memories more efficiently. And that to me now, being a father of 4 daughters, is really what matters.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And the brain really is fascinating. I mean, the way that it can create neural pathways or new neural pathways, once there has been damage, I think it's so incredibly fascinating how we can get our memory back and get cognitive improvement back. I know for me, I was 3 years out and I didn't think that there was any chance that I could get it back. And
right.
I did. So it's, how long of a program did you do? Did you do a 12-week?
No, it was 12. Yes, 3 months, 100 hours.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's intense. It's like, he was going to put me on a plan. I think it was 5 days a week or 4 days a week plus homework at home. And it's really intense. And that's what your brain needs to get those pathways, refiring.
Yeah,
And it's exhausting.
it is. It's exhausting. I remember even sweating
Mm-hmm.
in the process of, and it's it's not cheap. I mean, that's another thing that needs to be resolved for people, is that because it takes so much time. Not only do you have to find the time, I mean, my 100 hours were 4 days a week, an hour and a half a session. And so you've got to be able to find the time to pour into this every day. And that's why these brain games that people are trying to sell, they're never going to have the effect on your life that a program like this would, because there's nothing to hold you accountable to do the actual amount of work and time that you
And
need,
push you.
and to push you to have an accountability partner there that's not going to let you um, do things at half of your ability. And so, my hope is that we're going to see some new companies, some organizations, some programs that are going to be made available to people that are going to be able to solve some of those problems, because there's no reason why anybody who has ever faced a concussion shouldn't be able to go and really train themselves and push themselves to experience the kind of improvement that I've experienced.
And, anyone watching, no matter how far you are, I want you to know that there's always hope. And no matter how severe you think your injury is, there's always hope. And, I think Ben and I both are examples of that. I was at a point where I was pretty much giving up. I'm like, well, I guess this is the best it's going to be. And Ben, I think our podcasts were about a year apart, and I could tell a difference between those two podcasts in
Yeah.
just your ability to track a conversation. And even now, I mean, you're having no trouble.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, there's always hope. And, unfortunately, a lot of the therapies that help aren't covered by insurance. And like you said, they cost money and they take time, but you just have to weigh those options.
Right.
And for everyone in the Facebook group and watching, I will post, I interviewed Rich, the owner of our local Learning RX. He talks a lot about his program. So I'm going to put that in the comments so that you guys can also reference that as well.
Cool.
So Ben, anything else that you want us to know? What are you working on now? You're doing a lot of your music is what you're up to now. I love following. All of you need to follow his Facebook page because he does cool stuff.
Well, look, I think, I do a lot with, I have a company called Management Essentials that focuses on high performing culture and leadership. And it has to do with, building elite culture in business that leads to performance. And then I've got the music on the side of things. And I think what's the connection between what I'm doing as an entrepreneur and the success that I have experienced in my cognitive strengthening is being a proactive thinker. I think, if there's one thing that we can all do, I think it's challenging ourselves to be, as I talk about this in my keynote to different companies, it's the question, what does it mean to be a champion learner? And a neurologist will tell you that every time you learn something new, you create new brain synapses. Mm-hmm. And we have a culture that really, I think, disables us from being champion learners. Everything is so easy. We can just sit down and everything is at our fingertips. Nobody reads books anymore. We're on the computers, even for our reading, or we're doing audiobooks or this or that. And I think one thing that I've tried to do a better job of is to challenge myself to always be a learner, to always be somebody that's trying to experience new things, to learn new things, because that's improving my cognitive abilities and it's keeping me sharp. And so if you can't afford a Learning RX program, or you don't have the time to, there are other things that you can be doing that are going to challenge your ability to learn. And when you do that, you're going to already begin to see certain improvements because of your consistency in challenging yourself that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really, really great point. Just to constantly be a learner. And, the whole point of starting this book club was just to get people reading. And, whether, some people do need to do audiobook because they have a hard time reading post brain injury, but just, reading a book. I mean, reading a book is so powerful for your brain. And just learning new things and hearing new experiences. I just think it's so empowering for the survivors to read these books.
And that's one thing too. And obviously, like, depending on the severity of the injury, and obviously I'm not an MD, I'm not a medical doctor or neurologist, but I can tell you, as just from an athlete's perspective, I never faced an injury that didn't hurt when I rehabbed it. And I think sometimes we so easily, if we start to do the work, and it might cause a little bit more pressure, or we might begin to experience a headache, or we might begin to experience aching behind our eyes, or tightness in the back of our neck, and we so easily give up. Oh, that's not. But I can tell you, I experienced all of that when I did Learning RX. Mm-hmm. And the athlete in me said, keep going. And I would go home and I would rest. And then I remember weeks where I would experience the same kind of symptomatic consequences. And then all of a sudden, I went in the next week, and that Monday session was like, I was a different person. Like, my scores were better. I didn't feel the same. And so I think, that's only my experience, so don't copy me. But I think that there's I think that there's room for discussion with your doctors and with your therapists, whatever you're doing. There's room for discussion there, because I think the brain will respond, the brain will grow, the brain will strengthen, and it's not just going to be flowers and maple syrup. It's gonna, it's not just gonna. It's gonna, rehabbing any injury, whether you tear your, Achilles or your ACL, or you're rehabbing from a bone break. There's going to be pain involved, and there's going to be difficulty involved. But if you do it the right way, you're going to come out stronger on the other end.
Yeah, wow. That right there, that was just, if anybody got anything out of this talk tonight, that right there, you put it so perfectly. Rehabbing any injury hurts. And for me, reading was so hard. I could maybe read a chapter a night, and then I wouldn't even remember it the next day. It was so frustrating, but I kept at it because I'm such a reader. I used to read like a book a week. And so I kept at it, and it got a little bit easier. And then I remember it was the book Wild, and it's a thick book, a big old thick hardcover. And I sat on my couch and I read that whole book in a weekend. And I hadn't done that since my brain injury. And it was like, yes. And I remembered it.
Exactly.
So.
And it's because of all the work that you put in to keep reading a chapter, to keep going, to keep pushing yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, good for you.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. Any final thoughts you have for our book club?
Just surrender all you have. Don't ever give up, and don't ever give up hope.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you, Ben.
No
Thank
problem.
you, everyone, for being part of the book club. I'm so glad that you were all able to read Ben's book. And our book for next month is Hope Alcacer's Where Hope Lies. A little bit different from what we've been reading after the last two NFL books. So looking forward to that. So thanks again, Ben. Thanks for being here.
No problem.
I really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Yeah, bye-bye.